بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله حق قدره ومقداره العظيم. This sigha of the Salah al Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is called Salat al-Fatih, and it's prescribed for someone who wants a fatih in something. So if you want a fatih in knowledge, in ilm, in spiritual fatih, then this is a good salawat. And I know someone who, when they're reciting, they're memorizing the Quran, when they reach specific ayah they can't remember, he said he stops and he'll repeat this several times, and then he'll go back and begin again, and it's made easy for him. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله وصحبه حق قدره ومقداره العظيم. اللهم إنا نوينا التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والدعوة إلى الله والحث على التمسك بالكتاب والسنة والدلالة على الخير لوجه الله الكريم وابتغاء مرضاته وقربه وثوابه. Today we're going to discuss two afflictions or tribulations that a seeker on the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might go through. And the first one is to do with poverty. And the Imam says that at times a seeker to Allah may be tested with times of poverty and afflicted with a restriction in provision. And this could take the form of losing one's job, of not being able to find a job in the first place. It could be that one's business goes bust, a specific deal that they were doing doesn't come through. And he says in these times one should be thankful towards Allah and consider it a great blessing, which is counterintuitive because outwardly it seems like a very difficult thing. But then he goes on and he says, the reason you do that is that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he used to tie two stones on his stomach to keep the pains of hunger away. And the Sahaba used to tie, they came to him one day and they saw and they were complaining to him about the hunger that they were feeling. This was real hunger, to the extent that they tied a stone to their stomach to keep the hunger pangs away. And he lifted up his shirt sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they found he had two stones. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his house, there would be 2 months would go by, 2 months would go by, and not a fire would not be lit inside the house for making food or anything else. And he would survive sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on water and dates. And it wasn't for the fact that he didn't have the option of being wealthy. In fact, he was offered by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he could have the Jabal of Uhud as gold, the amount of, in other words, immeasurable wealth. He was offered immeasurable wealth sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but he chose poverty. And so if a person is afflicted with this, he should be thankful in that he is getting a portion of what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had. And the second thing is he should be thankful that Allah did not expose him to the fitna of the dunya such that he may be distracted from him, and that Allah has provided with him a door, a channel, and cut away all of the other distractions so that he may go directly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so he says, so he says, consider it a great blessing. Be thankful for it. And then one of the story of one of the Ibrahim bin Adham, and it's narrated through other tabi'een and other salihin, but they say that he met this pious man who asked him, how is the state of, this pious man asked Ibrahim, how's the state of zuhud with you, O Ibrahim? And he says, if provision is kept away from us, then we are patient. And if we are given, then we are thankful. And the man, he says, this is the adab of dogs, the character of dogs where we come from. If they're given, they're thankful, they'll wag their tail. And if they are not given, they're patient, they'll pant. And so Ibrahim asked him, then what's the state of zuhud for you? And he says, نحن قوم إذا منعنا شكرنا وإذا أعطينا آثرنا. We're a people whom if provision is kept from us, then we are thankful. And if we are given, then we give preference of that which we were given, we give preference to other people over it. And they say one of the salihin who lived, he died in 2010. Habib, I think Abdul Al-Saqaf, and a very wealthy businessman in Hijaz comes to him, and he gives him 1 million riyals, and he says to him, take this, do whatever you want with it. And he gave it to him, and the man refused except to give to the Habib. The Habib takes this bag, and he goes to one of his students, Habib al-Jafri. And Habib, you can look it up online, this story, Habib Ali tells it often. And he says, I went with him in the car, and we drove around all of the poor neighborhoods, and he would take from the bag and he'd say, go to the house of so-and-so and give them. Go to the house of so-and-so and give them. Go to the house of so-and-so, but be aware that this is a widow and she only has young girls, so just keep away from, make sure that you cast your eyes and ghadd al-basar, and then you give them such and such. He said, and we kept going until the end of the day, where he turned the bag around, it's upside down, and he says, and it was completely empty, and he says, Allahumma fashhad, oh Allah, bear witness. This is the akhlaq of the rijal, that if they're given, it's like they're filters of good, they're givers of good. Everything that comes to them, they give out. And one of the and then this is their state. And in fact, a great number of them, what they would do is, they wouldn't keep wealth, they wouldn't save wealth, they wouldn't save money. They would be in such a state of tawakkul that anything that they had, if they had excess, they would give it. And they would only use what they need. To the extent that one of the mashayikh who knew Sheikh Muhammad Mutawalli al-Sha'rawi, one of the great Imams and ulama and the salihin of Misr, rahimahullah, that once he heard that the Imam Muhammad Mutawalli al-Sha'rawi had a great amount of wealth that was stolen from him, from his house. Someone came in and stole that money. And the Sheikh, when he heard this, his friend was very surprised and very shocked. And his murid saw him, and he was wondering why it's just some money, it's just money, so what? So he called the Sheikh, and he called him up. Sheikh Muhammad spoke to him, and he said, suddenly my Sheikh relaxed, and he closed the line. And he said, Alhamdulillah, I thought that this wealth, it was Sheikh Shaykh al-Sha'rawi had kept it for himself. But the Shaykh told him that it was actually given to him by someone to keep as an amana in his house. And so the Shaykh, he relaxed. He said, this was my good opinion of Shaykh Muhammad, that he wasn't a person of the dunya and he didn't keep anything excess than what he had. This is real zuhd and real tawakkul. And it isn't to say that someone can be like that overnight, or that we should all suddenly emulate them in that way, but it's just to say that, that this is the maqam that they are, and that we should try our best to really appreciate these men, and really think that these maqams are possible, and it's not something that we just read about in books, that these are people living in our day and age that reach these great states. So he says the response should be, he should be thankful to Allah and consider it a great blessing. And then he talks about the Prophet ﷺ, and he says that life on earth is an adversary, it's an obstacle that Allah places towards his enemies, and he deflects it away from his awliya. And the awliya and the salihin that were ever given, you'll find that they're constantly giving out from that which was given them. And the Sahaba, from them Sayyidina Uthman, he became extremely wealthy, but constantly he would give out from his wealth. And he prepared the Jaysh al-Usra, the army, all prepared by him. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Now they say that the Prophet ﷺ, once he had a guest that he wanted to serve him, and he went and he asked his nine houses. He sent a servant to ask if any one of them had food, and none of them had anything to serve his guest. Sayyidina Umar, he goes to him and he sees him lying down on a mat of straw, hasir, such that the effect, he was lying down and it imprinted upon his noble skin, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Sayyidina Umar wept. And Sayyidina Umar wept, and the Prophet asked him, why did you weep? Why are you weeping? And he says, look at these great, look at Kisra, and look at Caesar, look at the head of the Byzantines, and all of these great kings and what they have in terms of luxury, and then I look at you, O Messenger of Allah. Your maqam is much greater than that. And the Prophet taught him a lesson. He says, for them is the dunya and for us is the akhirah. And the Prophet told us, he says, the likeness of me, O kama qal, in the dunya is the likeness of someone traveling on a road, and he sits under a tree for a while, then gets up and leaves. The Prophet ﷺ, when he died, his armor was pawned with a Jew for a measure of barley. Dir'uhu marhuna inda Yahudi, for a measure of barley, so that he can feed his family. And then he says, let your earnest desire be a piece of cloth to cover what should be covered of the Hawra, and just a bite of halal food to allay the hunger that you feel. He says this should be, if you want to really become a true murid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you should remove the desire of the world to the extent that you only desire from this world a piece of cloth to cover your awrah and a bite of food to allay your hunger. And then he says, be aware of the deadly poison that is looking and longing for the luxuries of the world, and being covetous of those who experience them. And he called it a deadly poison, Summul Qatil. And the reason one of the reasons it's a deadly poison is because it acts as such to one's own path towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it is the ultimate distraction. It's the ultimate thing that moves a person away from Allah. They're constantly distracted about what what's the new phone that am I going to buy, or what about the next car, and I should really save up to buy a new one, and what about this position, I really need to spend more time working, devoting my time to work on this project or that project so that I can gain that promotion, so that I get that raise, so that maybe I can afford to buy a new house or go on a vacation, and it just goes on and on and on and on. And if one continues in that state, then death will come abruptly, and you would have lost everything the most important thing that you have, which is your time on this earth. Because on the Day of Judgment, a person will be asked about everything once, and then they'll be asked about their wealth twice. How did they earn it, and in what way did they spend it? And people will come on the Day of Judgment wishing that they were in this world in a state of poverty, wishing, because of and in some hadiths that the people, the wealthy believers, will enter the paradise after such and such so many years after the poor ones. And it isn't to say that wealth in and of itself is a negative thing or a bad thing, but it is such that generally wealth and worldly possessions are, for the majority of people, a way that they are, and the shaitan distracts them, and their nafs distracts them from Allah, as opposed to bringing them closer. Then in fact, someone who has wealth and is able to use it wisely, their ajr is muda'af. They have huge reward from Allah. And the Prophet, he told us that we should, if we were to be envious of anyone, envious in the sense that wishing to have what they have, not wishing it to be removed. It's called ghibta as opposed to hasad. That we should be envious of two people. Have ghibta of two people. A person who has knowledge that he enacts and he teaches people and he acts upon that knowledge, and a person who is given wealth and that he uses that wealth for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But he says that remember that they will be later asked about the favors that were granted to them, and they will be taken to account for what they took and had enjoyed its lower pleasures. And he says, if only you knew of the hardship that they endure, the bitterness that they will have to swallow, and the troubles and anxieties they will have to carry in their hearts and breasts, all of which come from pursuing the worldly life and devotion to it and guarding it carefully, then you would see clearly that far outweighs the pleasures that they were to experience from it, if they experience any pleasure at all. A person who seeks the dunya will be sorely disappointed. If not in the dunya, then on their deathbed. There is no one that reaches the point of gharghara, where their soul is about to leave their body and they're wishing that they could have spent more time at work, or they're wishing that they could have earned more money. And the situation has become where the winner at the game, the successful person at life, is the one that can collect as much wealth as they can before they die. Whoever has as much, whoever has the most wealth before they die is the winner. Khalas, this is the person. This is, forgive me for saying this, but this is stupid. It's stupidity. It's you could be the greatest genius. You could have the highest IQ. You could be a PhD carrier from the best university, and you could have the best success story in your career, and if that is your aim in this world, then this is hamaqa. This is a dullness in them. This is a lack of insight. That person is misguided, severely misguided, really misguided, because it's not going to help. It's not going to help. Allah on the Day of Judgment will not ask you about your CV, show me your CV, will not ask you about how much money did you gain on earth, and if you gained a lot, fantastic, go to paradise, or I have two PhDs from Harvard, or I have met so and so famous people, or I have gone to so many countries, or I've this really doesn't matter. It really is inconsequential. The only thing that matters on that day is the state of your heart. And if the dunya entered your heart and polluted it, then woe to you 1,000 times. And if the dunya was kept away from you, and maybe it was difficult. Maybe one did experience hardship. Maybe one did experience humiliation in that sense, outwardly, from the pain that is wanting and lacking provision. But ultimately, on that day, it really doesn't matter. Those things don't matter. And you will receive your reward so completely and utterly, and you will receive such great reward that you won't, that all of this hardship will seem like this bad dream. It will just be like a bad dream. And the disbelievers on that day will be asked, how many years did you spend on the earth? And they say a day, or maybe part of a day. That's it. Now the Imam, he goes on and he says, he quotes two verse from the Quran. وَلَوْلَا أَنْ يَكُونَ النَّاسُ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً لَجَعَلْنَا لِمَنْ يَكْفُرُ بِالرَّحْمَنِ لِبُيُوتِهِمْ سُقُفًا مِّن فِضَّةٍ وَمَعَارِجَ عَلَيْهَا يَظْهَرُونَ وَلِبُيُوتِهِمْ أَبْوَابًا وَسُرُرًا عَلَيْهَا يَتَّكِئُونَ وَزُخْرُفًا وَإِن كُلُّ ذَلِكَ لَمَّا مَتَاعُ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةُ عِنْدَ رَبِّكَ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. And were it not that all men might become of one evil way of life, we would provide for everyone that blasphemes against Allah, the Most Gracious, silver roofs for their houses, and silver stairways on which to go up, and doors and silver doors to their houses, and thrones of silver on which they could recline, and so adornments of gold. But all of this were nothing but the conveniences of the present life, and that the hereafter in the sight of thy Lord is for the righteous. It's a speck. That this world and all the pleasures that are in it is a speck compared to the afterlife. In the hadith, the likeness of this, the first sama and the second sama, is like a ring thrown in a desert, and the second and the third like a ring thrown in a desert, and the third and the fourth like a ring thrown in the desert in terms of size. And it keeps going and going. And the likeness of the sixth heaven in the seventh heaven is like a ring thrown in a desert, and the likeness of the seventh in the kursi is like a ring thrown in the desert. Now the seventh heaven, that is where paradise and the fire is. And the people of paradise will see the, just to give you the scale of the vastness of this dominion, that the people in the middle heaven will see the people in the highest in the higher ranks of paradise, like you see a star in the sky, like a twinkling planet, twinkling star in the sky. That's how they will see them. So what kind of, what is awaiting these people? What is awaiting the righteous? And the Prophet ﷺ, he says, الدنيا سجن المؤمن وجنة الكافر. The world is the prison of the believer and the garden of the disbeliever. And had it been worth the wing of a mosquito to Allah, He would never have allowed a disbeliever a sip of its water. Now, one of the Salihin was asked, this a kafir came to him and told him, saw this great alim, and this alim was wealthy, and he was on his horse and he was riding. And this kafir, who was looking disheveled and clearly very poor, comes to him and he says, your Prophet says that the dunya is the prison of the believer is the prison of the believer and the Jannah of the disbeliever. And look at me and look at you. Look at you in your nice clothes and your nice horse, and look at me in my disheveled state. And he says to him, the next world for a believer, even if they have what I have, is like a prison compared to what is awaiting them. And for a disbeliever, even if he's in your state, then the next world is like, then this world is like a Jannah compared to what's awaiting him. The man looked at him and he made the Shahada. He became Muslim. The point of it is that if we were to truly see, and we were truly to be aware of the experience of life in this world and in the next, then we wouldn't find any of what came before, any of what the Imam was trying to tell us, difficult to enact. Yani, think of this world as, seeing a black and white grainy screen, and then think of the next world as 4K, Ultra HD, where you are able to experience things are so very real to you in that world, that in this world, and that's why in the Athar it said, النَّاسُ نِيَامْ فَإِذَا مَاتُوا انْتَبَهُوا. People are asleep, and when they die they wake up, because then they experience the true reality of things. وَالْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ وَأَبْقَى وَلَلدَّارُ الْآخِرَةُ لَهِيَ الْحَيَوَانِ. لَهِيَ الْحَيَوَانِ. Allah tells us that it is real living, and it is better, and it will remain. And then in the Athar it is said that from the moment Allah created the dunya, He did not look at it. He did not look at it in a sense, He did not look at it نظرة manzila, that a look of contentment or rida, or that it is worth anything. And that it does not even equal the wing of a butterfly, the wing of a mosquito to Allah. How many have gone before? How many kings and princes, and you can go and visit their graves. You can go and see them. If we were to see their state now, they would have wished just for a moment that they could be in this world just to make some dhikr. The Imam then, he says that he talks to us about provision, rizq. And he says that one should realize that provision is divided and allocated by predetermined decree. We should understand this, that the rizq does not come from the earth, that it comes from the heavens. And that Allah swore by this in His book. One of the A'rab, a Bedouin, came to one of the Sahaba, if I remember correctly, at the Kaaba, and he asked for him, what has Allah sent down from the Quran? And the Sahabi said to him, recited to him, وَفِي السَّمَاءِ رِزْقُكُمْ وَمَا تُوعَدُونَ. And in the heaven is your rizq, your provision, وَمَا تُوعَدُونَ. And the Arabi said, Allahu Akbar. And he was struck by this. And then he came to him, and the second year, they say he came back the second year, and he said, what else did Allah say? And he recited to him the continuation of that ayah, فَوَرَبِّ السَّمَاءِ وَالْأَرْضِ إِنَّهُ لَحَقٌّ مِثْلَ مَا أَنَّكُمْ تَنْطِقُونَ. And by the Lord of the heavens and the earth, it is true, it is indeed true. مثل ما أنكم تنطقون. Allah swears that this is true. And the Arabi was so taken aback. He says, Allahu Akbar, who man kadhab al-azim, who is in doubt of what Allah is saying, such that they would force him to swear to make an oath. And this is a very powerful ayah. It says the rizq, what you have been allotted in this world. And rizq, now the ulama, they defined as that which, and there's a differing of opinion, but the predominant position is that rizq, provision, is not what you own. It's not like what's in someone's safe or someone's bank account. It is what they use from that. So it is what you use from, so the morsels of food that you eat, that's your rizq. You know, the clothes that are on your back, that's part of your rizq. But they say that Allah has decreed this, and it comes from the heavens, and that Allah swears that this is true. And that is why, and that doesn't mean that one shouldn't strive to gain wealth, and this is part of the adab, or that one should not, the adab with Allah is that one should strive unless they're in the state of, unless, you know, they're in a minority in which they are mutajarridun. But for the majority of people, you know, they should seek provision, but it shouldn't be such that it completely distracts them from their ultimate purpose. That it should be a means to an end and not an end in itself. You know, and of course, unfortunately, this is completely reversed nowadays, and people spend decades learning and studying things so that they can get a good job and get money. But he says, if you are apportioned a small share of it, then you should exercise patience, be content and pleased with Allah that He has what He has allotted for you. But if you are someone whom Allah has given a large share, then you should be satisfied and just take what is necessary and spend the rest in the way of goodness. And we know that that with sadaqah, wealth does not decrease by sadaqah. It's a wa'd from the Prophet ﷺ. He says, "Ma naqasa malun min sadaqah." Wealth does not decrease because of sadaqah. In fact, it's the opposite. Bal yazdad, bal yazdad, bal yazdad. It increases, it increases, it increases. Through giving, one is given great barakah in one's wealth. One is, it's a means by which the sick are healed. Dawu mardakum bis sadaqah. It's a means by which one's, in fact, it's one of the ways to be thankful. That if one is thankful and gives for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will do what? Not only keep their provision, but will increase them. He'll give them more to give. And that the sadaqah is, it extinguishes the wrath of Allah. And it extinguishes bad deeds. Now then the Imam goes on, he says, but understand this, that if one has been given great wealth, it is not necessary that one should to spend all of it or leave it in order to reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nor is it necessary that one leaves one's job or one's craft in order to seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rather, one should one should spend in the way the wealth for the sake of Allah, and make sure that this craft or this wealth does not distract him. If, however, he says, if you find, should the seeker know that his heart would not be firm or his religion safe except by shedding his wealth and all other means, then it becomes incumbent upon them to do such. And you'll find some of the Salihin, like Bishr al-Hafi, he used to be extremely wealthy and he just gave it all up because he saw it as a big distraction. And you'll find some of the tabi'een and some of the salihin, they did that because that was their state, that was their maqam. And some people, and these are maqamat, and not everybody is the same. And our religion does not shun wealth. In order to be one could be the wealthiest person on earth, and one can be the greatest wali on earth. But it's a very dangerous thing to play with, and to spend too much time, to spend one's time just longing for the world and longing for these things is the poison that the Imam said it is. And then he says that oftentimes, as many people are, they're in a state of need for provision, or seeking provision and finding a job, etc., in order that they may fulfill the obligations that are upon them with regards to their children and their wives and families and others. So one should have moderation. Now, traditionally in the Muslim world, people would work, there was no such thing as a weekend. So a person would work 7 days a week, but instead of working 8 hours or 10 hours a day, they'd work, say, 6 hours a day. They'd get up at Fajr, maybe they start after sunrise, let's say they start at 8 a.m., and they're finished by 1 or 2, and then they have the rest of the day for their family to spend in worship and in drawing closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This time is very difficult. It's very difficult to do this, and often people's time is just overtaking everything. That the search for the dunya and people's jobs, and quite most of the time people can't help it. Someone who's working in a company doesn't have a say in the times that they have to work, but this is the state, and Muslims traditionally were not, didn't have to do that, and many of them would work only to the extent, if they had a business, would go to the market, open the shop, work until they'd got the provision that they needed for that day, and then that's it, they'd close. So maybe one day they'd work 4 hours, one day 2 hours, that's alhamdulillah, I got enough for the day, I'm closing up and I'm going to go and use the rest of my time wisely, because they understood that the time that they had was extremely, extremely valuable. Huwa ra'sul mal, it is the capital that we have, and it's slowly going away, slowly melting. And if you don't use every breath that you have, then you will then you will be very sorry for that when one breathes their last breath. Now the thing is, at the same time, to say that we don't have any time to do anything is also, it's also a trick that the shaitan plays, and our nafs plays with us. Often we say, well, I don't have time, I have this and I have this and I don't have time. Where if we really think about it, it's not that we didn't have time, it's that we preferred other things, to do other things that maybe were not, as opposed to making dhikr, for example, or as opposed to reciting the Quran, or as opposed to sitting in the masjid, or if you really think about it, well, where did that 2 hours go that I was watching TV the other day? Or where did that hour go that I was just driving around? Or where did that hour go that I was, 2 hours that I was sleeping and I could have, I didn't really, and people can find, the shaitan will play a trick where they'll say, khalas, you're too busy, you can't do that. But if we really sit down and think about it, and we really, just make an effort, you'll find that that we have more time than we think. And barakah, the thing about time, it's not, once a person begins to, so for example, make adhkar, at the beginning they find that such and such a dhikr, doing 100 istighfar, 100 salah al Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, 100 la ilaha illallah, takes a long time and a lot of effort. After a while, when they increase, they find that they're able to do the same thing in the same amount of time. They're able to do maybe 1,000 istighfar, 500 salah al Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, 500 la ilaha illallah, and it's the same effort, and they don't really feel, and they don't really think about where that time came from. Barakah will be given, and the more one allots time to Allah, the more Allah will allot time for them. So to such an extent that there are people who you read in the seerah, in the akhbar of the awliya, in Hilyat al-Awliya, in these books that talk about the saints and the salihin, that such and such an imam would pray 100 rak'ah in the evening, or 200, or 300, or 400. And if one sits there and tries to figure it out, well, that would mean that how could that be possible, and is this even physically possible with the time that he has from sunset till the dawn, until you realize that for them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them barakah in their time. And this is done by tajru. One could speak about it all day, but it's something that is experienced. That one could have a relatively short life, but have so much barakah in it that it is equal to 300 years of another person's life. Imam al-Nawawi, he died in his 40s, but if you look at his works and what he's done, the barakah, and if they worked out how much time that he would have needed to actually sit and write every day, and it was just extraordinary. How did that man, radiyallahu anhu, how did he find time to do all of these things? And yet he died in his 40s. And there are people who reach 100 and khalas, and it's as if they didn't live for a day. So doing these good things, doing adhkar, and making sure that one's time is spent in beneficial things will create barakah. And another thing that also creates barakah in time and in umr is salatul arham, is keeping connecting with one's family and one's rahim, going and visiting them, and spending time with them and treating them well. And it's a wa'ad from the Prophet ﷺ that person will be given barakah in their umr. Now then the Imam says, he says that you will never be able to be in a constant state of obedience and a constant state of avoiding the lusts of lower desires and turning away from the dunya until you realize that your days in the world are few and that death is near. None of this will be possible until you come to that realization. And the way that you come to that realization is is constantly reminding yourself and constantly contemplating the akhirah, the the temporary nature of the dunya, and the nearness of death, because it could literally come at any moment. Any moment the Malak al-Maut could come, and that's it. We don't know that if we take this breath that I'll be able to exhale. We don't know how much time is left, really. If someone could see, if there was a timer that could show us, maybe 50 days, 13 hours, 15 minutes, and it just counts down. And for every person in the ghaib, there's this allotted time. But we don't know, it's hidden from us. And there are so many people that you hear about every day that were perfectly fine, that suddenly they're gone. Suddenly such and such had a car accident and he passed away. Such and such has gotten sick and they're in hospital, they have cancer. So and so has heart problems and they're khalas, and this is the state of the world. And one of the things that my grandfather, he rahimahullah, he towards the end of his life, he'd say, you know, I now feel like I'm a complete stranger, because everybody that I know has now passed away. And I go around the souq and in the streets, and I used to be able to say hello to everybody and know everybody. And he says, now I don't know anyone. Khalas, gharib, and I'm going to go. This is the state of human beings. It's kind of really the microcosm of that, working at a, you know, if you've ever been to university, that at the beginning when you first come, it's very new and you're excited. Second year, you know everybody, you're established. Third year, you know, you're king of the castle. By fourth year, suddenly you come in and you realize, oh wow, where is everybody? I don't know anyone anymore. And then suddenly it's all over. SubhanAllah, for me, I find it like a microcosm of life. I work in a school and I see this. This is the state of the dunya, just coming and going. Everything that you see on earth, all of the people that are here, in 100 years time, they will no longer exist. They'll be in the barzakh. And it's like a, you know, it's like a moving, you know, one of those moving escalators. You're constantly moving, and it's like, okay, next. And we'll wake up one day and we'll realize, where did our life go? You know, wow, just yesterday I was in my 20s, or just yesterday I was playing and I was in school. Alhamdulillah. And the thing is, coming to that realization, there's benefit in that the calamities and the tribulations of the world will seem very insignificant once you do that. Hardships will become insignificant. And we talked about, the Imam talked about the importance of dhikr and fikr, contemplation. We said there were 3 types of contemplation, and one of them we said the contemplation of the hereafter and the state of this world. And just to reiterate that again and again, visiting the graves is very important. So he said, do not have vain hope. Do not have tul al-amal, this vain hope that I'm going to do and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this. It's fine to have, you know, one needs to be able to, you know, desire lofty things, but not have vain hopes in the dunya. Make one's hopes in the hereafter. You know, one's long-term plan should not be limited to the dunya. One's long-term plan should be, how is my state going to be when I'm resurrected on the Day of Judgment? How is my state going to be? Am I going to be prostrating? Am I going to be doing talbiyah? Am I going to be giving sadaqah? Am I going to be resurrected doing dhikr? Because one, of course, the state that one dies in is what one is resurrected in. Am I going to be on the day? How will I be in the hashr? Will I be, you know, am I going to be among those in the divine shade of Allah? Or am I going to be in the scorching heat? What's my long-term plan? How close do I want to be to the Prophet ﷺ on that day? We know the closest people to him are those who are the greatest of character. The closest people to the Prophet are the people with the best character. And the closest of people to the Prophet are those who have the most salawat upon him. Okay, what is my long-term plan for that? Have I sat down? Have I written down? Have I gone through a plan where that in 3, 4, 5 years time I have such and such amount of dhikr that I'm doing. I'm reading so many books. I'm spending so much time reciting the Quran. Today I'm beginning with a page a day. In 5 years time my plan is to be finishing 1 juz' a day. My long-term plan is to do hifz of the Quran. Why? Because on the Day of Judgment, when it is said to a person, recite and be elevated, for indeed your position in heaven your rank in heaven is at the last ayah that you recite. I want the last ayah that I recite. I want to be able to recite the Quran. I want the highest rank. I want to be, my long-term plan is that that when I pass away, that I'm gaining a reward for hundreds of years to come because of such and such knowledge that I was able to spread to people. Or that I had wealth and I was able to build such and such a mosque, and that in the barzakh, until the day of judgment, until the day of the qiyamah, I'm giving. These are long-term investments, but they're not worldly investments. We're not saving for retirement. We're saving for ultimate retirement. And there are some people who, the good that they do, like the Imam Al-Haddad, he lived 300 years ago, and still hundreds of thousands of people around the world benefit from his words. This is a person who had a very long-term plan, and his hope was not, and his desire was not, didn't stop at the 60 or 70 years that one lives. And so he says, beware of long-term ambition, because such ambition sways one towards the love of worldly life and makes it difficult for one to persevere in obedience. It's very easy to forget. One majlis, one could forget. That's why it's extremely important to always remember, always to remind oneself. And all of these adhkar that one does, they have that effect. All of the good that one does has that effect. For amal as-salihah and recitation of the Quran. Now, the Imam then goes on, he says, sometimes a person will be afflicted, a murid will be afflicted by hostility from creation. He will be shown hostility and enmity, and he will be harmed by people, such that they might harm him, hurt him, or treat him harshly, or talk about him disparagingly. And he says, in that state, one should remain patient and forsake retaliation, and maintain one's heart pure of grudges and evil intentions against those people. Now, the reason for that is that as soon as you allow that to affect you and create in your heart enmity and hatred towards that person, then that will severely affect your path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is a reason, a huge obstacle. And one should forsake retaliation. Now, one needs to really think about it this way, that the Prophet ﷺ, how much did he experience from hardship? People swore at him, people threw rocks at him, he lost his 2 front teeth. He was harmed such that blood fell from his noble face until his feet were bloodied. People would place the entrails of, once he was prostrating in front of the Kaaba, and one of the kuffar of Quraysh came and took the entrails of a camel, and then he put it all over him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Huge, so much harm, and he is the most noble of creation, the most noble of creation. And I remember once I was subhanallah, I experienced I experienced some harm from someone. Someone said something, and it it affected me, and I spoke to, I spoke to my mother, and she said immediately, she said, well, do you remember what the Prophet ﷺ had to go through? Remember all the difficulties he had to go through? This is nothing. I was right, Sah, Allah, it's true. It's absolutely nothing. And realizing that, and also taking solace in that, the state of the world is such that it is not even worth, if it had such a high rank with Allah, if it was worth anything to Allah, then the first people who would have tana'um in the dunya and the high maqam in the dunya in terms of dunyawi sense would be the Prophet ﷺ. But that's not the case. He said one should remain patient, forsake retaliation, and maintain that your heart is pure of grudges and evil intentions against them. Now one may ask, say, this is very difficult. It's very difficult for me. This person has caused so much harm to me. This person has really, really hurt me. And I just can't. I just remember them and I just find that I hate that person. What should I do? The ulama, they say, number one, first thing you should do is do not make dua against them, make dua for them. بِظَهْرِ الْغَيْبِ. Oh Allah, guide so and so. Oh Allah, forgive so and so. Oh Allah, bless so and so. Making dua for them, and it's difficult initially, it's very difficult, but the more one does it, the more easy it becomes. He says then one should also, if one can, and this is seek the means by which to reconcile those differences. So visiting that person, sending one's salams to them, gifting them something. Many people, how many people do we hear of that have gone decades, for example, without speaking to a family member? Or gone, how many years have they not spoken to their friend because of something that they said? If one really wants to take the path to Allah seriously, then one needs to reconcile those differences, even if that person turns away. This is the maqam of the awliya, to the extent that some of them, and I know some people don't like this example or this story, but it's a reality. Imam Zayn al-Abidin, when he came out of the mosque one day, and Imam Zayn al-Abidin is the great grandson of the Prophet ﷺ. So he's the son of Al-Hussein, who's the son of Sayyidina Ali and Sayyidatuna Fatima. So he's the great grandson. He comes out of the mosque one day, and one of the juhala comes to him, and he swears at him, and he continues and he swears at him and says horrible things about him in front of him. And the Imam puts his head down like this, and then he smiles, and the Imam finishes, and then he says, everything that you've said about me is true. Now why did he say that? Because he genuinely thought, he was genuine in that state of humility that he saw himself less than other people. And then he said to him, would you like me to do anything for you? Do you have any do you need any money? Do you need anything for the nasiha that you gave me? And the Imam, the man was in such a state of shock, he began to weep, and he went to the hand of the Imam and began to kiss it, and he says, please excuse me, these people, they told me I was I was poor and I needed money, and they said that if I could manage to get you to get riled up and swear at me that they'd give me such and such amount of wealth. He said, if you'd come and told us, we would have given you. We didn't, and we would have given you without needing to do that. And he took the man home and he gave him what he gave him. But this was the state of the Salihin. And they say that some of the, because they didn't have any rancor in their heart for anyone. No enmity to anyone in creation. The Prophet ﷺ, the people who wanted to kill him, who wanted to destroy his everything that he'd built, kill his companions, in the state of war in Uhud, when he had blood running down his face, when he'd lost his teeth, when he was the army was in disarray, when he was hiding in the Jabal Uhud, he'd gone up. The Sahaba asked him to make dua against the kuffar. What did he say? Allahumma hdi qawmi fa innahum la ya'lamun. Oh Allah, guide my people, for they do not know. Now then the Imam says, beware of asking or invoking Allah the Almighty to send down His wrath on those who injure you. And if bad things happen to them, never say. So someone may have a quarrel with someone, and then one day they hear that they got into a car accident, or they got sick or something. So, aha, subhanallah, this is from all the bad things that they did to me. Look at how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has retaliated on my sake. He says, never say that. He said, beware of even thinking that. Because that is a very dangerous thing to do. Because if you think that, or if you're saying that, then that means that you are suggesting that you have a maqam that is very, very that is very high. Now, this is what the Imam is giving us. He's saying this is the best thing that you can do. Okay.
This apply to Muslims.
This is to anyone. The Prophet ﷺ, we said the Prophet, when he was harmed, he retaliated with good. The woman who came to him, we know this very famous story, that the Jewish woman who would put thorns and things in his path by his doorstep, and one day he came and there's no thorns in his path, so he went to visit her, and he found she was sick. And this was a non-Muslim. This is the state of, the thing is we think that these things apply to, Muslims, and the non-Muslims have another set of rules. Imam Al-Nawawi, he says in the tafsir of لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه, that none of you truly believes until you love for your brother what you love for yourself. Imam Al-Nawawi in his sharh, he says, and that is brother, meaning brother in humanity. Brother in humanity. Sorry, you had a...
So I shouldn't pray against George Bush.
Now, Now, that is the highest maqam. The maqam lower than that, one is allowed to pray against those who make dua against those who harm someone. But not, so for example, someone who harms kafir, who harms Muslims, for example, one can pray that alayhi min Allah ma yastahiq, that may Allah give him what he deserves. Or one can make dua am, so a general dua. So, oh Allah, to anyone to the zalimeen, to the people who harm the Muslims, to people who cause the shedding of blood, to people who cause fitna. Oh Allah, make their plans go awry and make their hearts. One can make dua, but make it. Our ulama, they said make it dua am. Don't do takhsis, because one doesn't know the khatima of people. And this is the haqq of a person to make dua against someone who harms them, to the extent, but not to go overboard. And then in terms of the Sharia, what we're speaking about in terms of Ihsan, the highest maqam. In terms of Sharia, one, of course, if one is harming one, then one can go to the judge and one can, file a claim against them because they stole this or they took this or whatever. That's a haqq. That can't be. This is the rule of law. But the Imam is saying, if you want the maqam of Ihsan, this is the maqam of Ihsan. And we know that the Prophet ﷺ made dua against certain people, against certain aqwam. But it was very rare, very, very rare. And it was only in specific, very, very specific circumstances. So as far as I can remember. And he says, so the highest maqam then, it would be even better if you were able to exercise more than just being patient in enduring these wrongdoings, is to forgive them and to pray Allah the most forgiving for them to be good. Such would be the behavior and the traits of the righteous, of the Siddiqeen. Now then the Imam goes to a second tribulation, which is the opposite of the first. And in some ways that's even more difficult to deal with, because it affects one without one really knowing. It doesn't have, with the tribulation of harm, one immediately experiences that harm and can turn to Allah because of it. With this obstacle, which is the admiration of people, he says, if you're being tested that people look up at you and seek your audience and respect you and praise you repeatedly, then that in itself is a greater trial, because لِنَفْسِكَ حَظٍّ مِنْهِ, your ego, your nafs has a portion of it, you want it, you desire it, it brings you a good feeling. And they say that the last thing to exit, the last bad quality to exit the heart of a person who's reached the maqam of Siddiqeen is the love of manzila, is the love of makana, the love of being praised with other people. It's the last thing that exits from the heart of a person who reaches the states of the Siddiqeen. So he says, if you're in that state where people look up at you and admire you and respect you and constantly seek your audience and ask you to make dua and all of these things, he says, then be aware, and because this is a severe trial upon you. One of the Salihin, he's a very well-known TV personality, he's a scholar, he's a da'i. Once on live TV, I remember it, he was asked about something to do with celebrity and things like that, and he said, he began weeping on live TV. He began to weep, and he says, I wish that I could just be, that I would die and خرجت من هذه لا لي ولا علي, that I would come equal with my hasanat and si'at, for the fear that he had in his heart about it. Imam Muhammad Mutawalli al-Sha'rawi, I think we maybe mentioned this before, he was very, very famous, and people looked up at him, and remember we told you, I think we mentioned the story of him, that he had such a huge crowd came to see him, that when he went and he started scrubbing the bathroom, because this was a man who was afraid for himself. So the Imam's saying, he says, be aware of this, and be thankful that Allah has hidden your faults and deficiencies from them, because if Allah was to remove the sitr, then maybe none of them would even look at you. And think and really understand that. He says, if you are worried about being pretentious, that is pretending or artificially trying to look better in their eyes by showing off, in their presence, then you should shun being around such people in the first place. Shun any kind of interaction like that. If someone is fierce for oneself in that state, then one should shun until one fortifies oneself spiritually, and then one can go out again. He says, then one should dissociate from them, and if necessary, shut your house, the door of your home on them, so that they do not come again. Thus isolate from them, or else leave the place where you are known to one which you are unknown. This is what Imam Al-Ghazali did. Imam Al-Ghazali, when he had his spiritual crisis, he literally left everything and everyone, and he went into a khalwa, an isolation. You know, he traveled the lands, isolation. No one knew him. He didn't know. No one knew him. 10 years. And he worked as a. We mentioned he worked as a janitor. He would sweep the mosque, the Umayyad mosque, and no one knew who he was. And he would go one day and he'd sit in a halaqah, he'd be in sweeping the mosque nearby. Here in the halaqah, the great Imam Al-Ghazali said such and such, and he said, I would flee for fear of what that would do to my heart. One should be very humbled by this. But at the same time, the Prophet ﷺ, he says that if the believer is praised, رَبَّ الْإِيمَانِ فِي قَلْبِهِ, the Iman will grow in their heart. But one should be careful of excessively praising people. The Prophet, if he was to praise someone, he'd say, Ahsant, good job, you did well. As opposed to some people where it's constantly about praise and a lot of people build entire relationships on just the feel-good relationship, where I'm always praising my friend and he's always praising me, and then we all feel better about ourselves. Some of the Salihin, they used to honor people who would give them nasiha, and they used to admire these people and love the people who would give them nasiha more than anyone else. That the people of Allah, even if you see outwardly people admiring them and kissing their hands and doing this, the real person of Allah feels completely in a state of inkisar towards Allah when this happens to them. They're extremely humbled by it. They wish that no one knew them for that, and they see it as the greatest tribulation. And they see themselves lower than everybody else in the majlis. One of the sisters, I don't know if she's here, who asked last time about the awliya. How do you know the awliya? Because of the state of humility. One of the ways to know them is the state of humility, that they're truly humble. Now, one of the Salaf, righteous predecessors said, by Allah, a servant who is truthful with Allah always loves to go unnoticed in his status. And another said, I have never known a man who wished to be recognized, but that his religion left him and he became exposed. And we know that the first people to be thrown in the fire, one of the first people to be thrown in the fire, is a person who sought knowledge and taught it so that he could be known for that. So that people say that he's knowledgeable and he's wise, and that's one of the first people to be thrown in the fire. So one should give preference to remaining unnoticed and flee fame and publicity. Imam An-Nawawi and some of the great Imam were like this. If they saw more than 6 or 7 people in the majlis, they'd get up and leave. They said, this is a fitna for us, and they'd get up and they'd go. SubhanAllah. And there are some people who that's their whole life's ambition, is to be famous. And there are songs written about people wanting to be famous. It's laughable. It's really laughable, because more often than not it brings more hardship and harm outwardly in the dunya. Brings more hardship than it does good. رب أشعث أغبر مدفوع ذي طمرين مدفوع بالأبواب لو أقسم على الله لأبره. In the hadith, that there may be a person with nothing but 2 cloths to cover their body. Ash'ath, disheveled, poor. Madfu'un bil abwab. He goes to people kick him away from the thresholds of their doors. Keep him away. لو أقسم على الله لأبره. If he make an oath to Allah, if he were to say to Allah, oh Allah, I swear upon you to do such and such, then Allah would do it. Because it is not about whether someone is wearing a turban or wearing a thawb, or his beard is long, or they're wearing an extra dark abaya, or any of that. It's nothing to do with that. Ultimately, it's about the state of your heart with Allah and how that's manifest in your actions. And the story of one of the Salihin says that there was a year of drought that came to us, and we and everybody went out to do Salat al-Istisqa. Everybody went out and they prayed, and then they left. Nothing happened. He said, then I was in the masjid and I saw this black slave come into the masjid without anyone saying to him. He prayed to Allah and he raised his hands and he says, and he prays to us, Ya Rab, aqsamt alayk illa ma saq. I swear to Allah, except that you send down the rain. He said, no sooner had that slave said that than he heard the thunder and lightning and the rain came down. He said, and I was amazed. And he said, and I followed this person without seeing me, and I found that he was a slave to someone in the city. And he said the next day I remembered where he went, and he said the next day I went with money, and I said to him I want to buy such and such a slave from you. And he said, which one? He said, this one. He said, this one? You want this one? Belittling him. He says, yeah, I want this one. He said, oh, you can take him. How much does he cost? And he bought the slave, and he was going to, and then he told him, he says, I saw you, he told that slave, he says, I saw you in the mosque yesterday, and you make that dua, and what Allah gave you. And the man, he was very surprised by this, and he was deeply disturbed. He said, you saw me? He said, yes. And they say that he prayed 2 rak'ahs and he made the dua. He says, oh Allah, the secret between you and me has been lifted. Oh Allah, don't keep me in this world. He made a sajda and he died. And the muezzin on the Day of Judgment, these people on the Day of Judgment will be kings. We'll all know them. And that's why every single believer that you meet, you should have the good opinion that they are wali or wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even if they're in a state of disobedience, because maybe before they die, they make a tawbah, and Allah will take them in a state of wilayah. Inshallah, we'll end here. If anyone has any comments or questions.
I was thinking about what you're saying about Dunya and getting caught up in it in terms of early infliction financially. And I was thinking about, I know that through all the ages, the scholars said this was a difficult time, this was a terrible time. So I think that too, but this time, because we spend huge amounts of money, because we have to. For example, me and my family who live here, my children can't do Arabic, they can't learn in Arabic, they started off, but they couldn't. So you end up spending a huge amount of money on school fees, you end up spending a huge amount of money on education just before, we don't have family services in the girls. You have to make sure that they're qualified, so you end up, and you're constantly aware of how much you're spending, huge amounts, but the intention is always good, inshallah.
Like we said, the point is not whether one has or has not, it's how one spends it and what intention one has when doing that. And spending money on your family is a sadaqah. People forget that. When a man spends on his wife, when someone, a wife spends on her family, then that's considered a sadaqah. They get ajr for that. It's not something that's taken lightly with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No, this time that we're living in is unique. And the A'imma, and you're right, every scholar will say this is the worst time, this time is fasid, but really what we're living in now, because of the collapse, the outward collapse of the Muslim way of life in terms of society, education, media, all of these things is unprecedented. We've never seen this, never. Even in the times of the greatest tribulation, when the Mongols, for example, came and they destroyed entire cities and killed hundreds of thousands of people, they didn't undermine the Muslim identity, who a Muslim is, what he is. And in fact, they were the ones who were ultimately converted then. They accepted Islam. Now we're living in an age where everything is imported. This is what makes it so dangerous.